All right, so I'm going to do a lecture on objectives. So in order to do this, I'm using an old DI called Thorpe by Mary Dutton. So I'll refer back to that script over here in this lesson, just in terms of like character objective. And I'll use the same one when I switch and do the lesson on tactics. So, all right, so starting off, first of all, an objective, right? So the objective asks the question, what does the character want in this specific scene? Okay, so keep in mind an objective is based on a particular scene. So going over to our script, okay? So we can see in our teaser that we have, hey y'all, be careful now. I assume this is from a different person. And then it says, I played out back a lot as a kid too. Behind the woods, down the creek, and through the bend. One Saturday at dawn and I came back on the bend behind the house, around a bend, much like that one, up a hill where we discovered Mr. Martin's house. We stepped onto the porch, and the man who opened the door was tanned, like he'd been out in the sun a lot. So in this particular section right here, if I'm just thinking about the objective, I would argue that the objective here is like exposition, but specifically exposition to paint a scene. My objective, if I was acting this scene, would be to let you be able to visualize exactly where I am and what's happening. So if I was actually going to act this, I would probably go something like this. If I know my objective is exposition of setting the scene. I played out back a lot as a kid, behind the woods and down the creek and through the bend. One Saturday, Dawn and I came up on the bend behind the house, around a bend much like that one, and up a little hill we discovered Mr. Martin's house. We stepped onto his porch, and the man who opened the door was tanned, like he'd been out in the sun a lot. Now, so my goal in acting it out loud for you is if I'm just trying to describe something, notice how I intentionally take time to give you beats and places that let you think or try to visualize as the audience where I am and what's happening. If I were to just run through it, I played out back a lot. Behind the woods, down the creek, and through the bend. I can't visualize that at all. You're giving me too many things to think about in succession to where I would not be able to follow you. Okay, so here, right there, my objective is like exposition description. All right. So now we have characters, right? So, hi, I'm Thorpe Torrance, and I live in the. Ignore my dogs. Hi, I'm Thorpe Torrance, and I live in the gray house where the dirt road ends, and I'm Martin Arnons. How do you do? All I need to get across here is what, right? Introduction. But it's not as simple as that. So knowing that the man is black, and I've told you in the line before that he'd been out in the sun a lot, that I can't comprehend that he is black. Rather, I'm trying to like scaffold that to something I can think of, like tanned. So how would Thorpe feel about meeting a black man? How would a black man feel about a little white boy being on his porch? That's going to motivate the introductions here. So maybe then it sounds like this. Hi, I'm Thorpe Torrance, and I live in the gray house where the dirt road ends. And I'm Martin Arnons. How do you do? Martin's definitely hesitant, right? You've got to get that emotion across somehow. And Thorpe is probably as well hesitant, but trying to make the connection. Continuing on. That's how I met and loved Martin. Martin was one of my best friends for as long as we lived in the house down the dirt road. We shook hands that day, and my circle of friends grew bigger. Man, the motivation here really is to connect with the audience that this was your friend. That's super important to where this is headed. Next scene. One night, when we ran around the curve in the trail, what we saw in front of Martin's house was one more part of that night. A big torch thing, shaped like a cross, was stuck down in one of Martin's flower beds. And it was burning. He's got to relive this memory, right? The objective in this particular scene is what, right? In the one night, his objective in this particular moment is to not only like exposition description, but also like recount something traumatic. So you have to do two things at once in this particular section, okay? So those are objectives, right? What does the character want, or what is the purpose of this scene? What do you need to get across? What do they need to show you or tell you? All right, so now let's talk super objectives. So A super objective is the character's objective for the entire play. And I know what you're thinking. Hamilton, do not read us this whole play. Or this whole script. I'm not going to. I'm going to spoiler alert it and tell you the super objective here. Well, let's talk about it. So in quick, this story is all about this older man who's reflecting on an experience as a young man where he and his friend Don are going through the woods. They walk over to their buddy's house, Martin. There's a cross burning in the middle of their in Mr. Martin's yard, and so they hide he hides and they're watching. And it turns out it's a Klan meeting, right? Obviously, they're whipping him. This is him having a memory of like, I'm not at a Klan meeting watching someone get whipped to death. It's I'm at the playground. Then huge discovery moment here. It's his dad. The man on the horse whipping him to death is his dad, right? Then when the man's face like is whipped to death and dies, he figures out it's his friend Martin, right? Then here at the end, we have this falling action. Martin helped me do all of these things, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, he realizes that he's not like his dad. He's Thorpe. He's not just a Torrance, and he knows better, right? Okay, so knowing the story in that quick objective, or in that quick summary, the super objective here is what? Well, if I'm processing it, I think the super objective for this, I think the way I would describe it is probably like two things. I think he's trying to reassure himself that he's not like his dad, this southern racist man in the South. But I also think there's like a persuasive element to try to convince others he's not the same. So super objectives are tough because there's a lot of things happening. So I think there's reassurance, persuasion, and then maybe even acceptance. There's that word again. So super objectives really are like, what is your objective? What are you trying to get in the entire play? Okay, so when you're phrasing an objective, it's easiest to just say, I want, and then the objective, right? So going back to our script, I want to let the audience know or paint a picture for the audience. That's here. I want to introduce myself to this black man as a young white boy and make sure he doesn't think I'm, crazy. I want to tell you about my friend. I want to describe a traumatic event, right? So what do you want? Now, in other scripts, it's going to be like, I want to get the girl. Thinking back to Nancy Blue Girl Detective, I want to solve this mystery. That's like a super objective, right? Or thinking about Enter Bogart, I want to figure out what happened to my teacher. I want to make a new friend, right? Sometimes the objective is like tangible that you can hold, but oftentimes in DI they're abstract. So that's why I use DI as an example, because it's a little more difficult. Okay. There's always an obstacle, right? So every objective, there's some sort of obstacle that creates like this conflict, right? This makes the character more interesting. It makes the character more real. So think about wording your obstacles is, my obstacle is. Now, obviously I'm giving you things to think about like in terms of like when your objectives are related to like the lines, right? So in this one, like I don't really have, I guess my obstacle is portraying the scene or portraying the setting. Okay, cool. That's an obstacle. But my obstacle here, right, is to put black man at ease. That's definitely conflict if you're playing it right. Come down here. Down here, his obstacle is not to get caught, right, because he's hiding. Right here, his obstacle is acceptance. Oh, God, I hate that. His obstacle is like acceptance that like that's his dad, right? So there's a lot of different things that can happen in each one of these scenes that create some sort of obstacle. Now, again, they can be like meta, very emotional, very cognitive, or they can be super tangible. Think about Nancy Blue Girl Detective. Her obstacle at first is to figure out where the smell is coming from. The next obstacle, where did this feather come from? Like, so they can be a lot more tangible that you could like hold. But oftentimes in a DI, it's a little more tricky to come up with like obstacles. Unless, like, I'm thinking back to Andrea's DI of 9/11. Like, her obstacle is like getting her kids or making sure they're safe or getting someone on the phone. Sometimes they're tangible in a DI too. Okay, so in the worksheet that is in Google Classroom, let's look at that together real quick. Boom. Character analysis worksheet. Okay, so in the character analysis worksheet, a lot of the stuff in the beginning is like you should be able to do, right? Name of your character, how old are they, blah, 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 blah. When you get down to super obstacles and tactics, don't worry about tactics. This really should be just your like obstacles and super obstacles. So just kind of like what I did here. What is the obstacle? What are they facing? So looking at this guy. Did I not ask you about objectives in this? Okay, so I'll add to this objectives, right? So I hope you watch this first or you're going to be like, what is he talking about? So in this answer right here, what you're going to want to do is objectives and obstacles. So objective. And don't do super objectives. Actually, yeah, do super objectives. Again, I hope y'all watch this. So if you just did super objectives, right, because that'll fit on this sheet because your next assignment is like with your actual script. So super objectives, I could do to figure out where the principal went. So I'm thinking Nancy Blue, right? So obstacles, 1. Where is the smell coming from? Right? So if that's an obstacle, what's the tactic? So a tactic is how you overcome said obstacle, right? So sniff. Like, I know this seems super simple, but like in an HI, when there's more tangibility to it, it can be a lot more simple. So you don't have to get super in depth on this because you're going to do it on your actual script. I just want you thinking big picture, right? So super objective, tell me a little bit about how you solve those things to get back to that super objective. Okay, so don't get super bogged down in this. Just give it a good old college try because what you're going to do next is in the next lesson, and that's going to deal with like tactics. All right.